The scientific work of a well-known nuclear scientist, N.J. Stovall, enjoys quite a reputation amongst scientists in the field, but he was an atheist. A strange thing happened during the course of his scientific investigations. He was working with other experts to determine the energy levels and the frequency of what is emitted from the deepest level of the brain. They had very well-refined instruments. One particular experiment puzzled him and those working with him. From what he was, an atheist, he began to use a strange expression. He called it the Creator's secret. He, along with others, worked on experiments on the processes of the deepest area of the brain, the cerebrum, during the process actually of dying. With 4 other scientists, he investigated the brain functions of dying people. And this is what the instruments came up with. It was done discreetly, and the measuring instruments were in another room, but linked obviously to the patient discreetly. When dying patients spoke their last prayers, often receiving sacred anointing by a priest, when they asked for forgiveness for their sins, with sighing and crying, and entrusted themselves completely to Jesus, when they begged Jesus for mercy to save their souls, something very strange happened. The high sensitivity measuring instruments gave a shrill sound, and the indicators swung to their highest frequency. This was the top of the scale, beyond which nothing could be measured. Larger measuring devices were built in order to be able to determine the frequencies more precisely, but always the same results. The 5 researchers looked stunned. They actually felt ashamed, even humiliated. They felt as if they had not been allowed to witness a sacred mystery. What they experienced again and again was not scientifically understandable. Again and again, they looked at the highest number. Any mistake was ruled out. The gigantically high frequencies continued for up to 30 seconds. The researchers could all measure with their own eyes the power of the dying, and could only explain it as a heavenly energy. This high frequency had to be connected with heaven. It had never been measured scientifically. Stovall later called it the mercy frequency of the forgiveness of sins. Measured frequencies were 55 times greater than the energy from the largest American radio station, measured by the same instruments. Now this corresponds to something fairly similar done by another expert, another team. They had managed to devise an instrument that picked up the energies that hover around a person. And the experiment was similar. They wanted to see what happened to a person who was about to peter out. And something was caught. They themselves were hidden, but this was recording what was happening. At a certain point, they noticed that a very high energy level came and moved when a priest came in, and it passed into the dying person. What was happening there was that the priest had brought the Blessed Sacrament, and that power was passing into the divine life of the soul, preparing it for eternity. These then are indications, and in the case of Stovall, all this scientific work prompted him to realize that there was a frontier that the scientist couldn't actually cross. It also helps us to realize that we are not just material. Indeed, the BBC picked up on this in the case of Pamela Reynolds. A documentary was produced, purely scientific and neutral, on the case of this person who had no hope because the aneurysm in her brain was in an inoperable spot. But one fairly young surgeon had the courage to do the impossible, to induce brain death and to work away. And what is puzzling is that the lady was able to report about what she had seen when she was clinically dead. Her soul came out of her body and she was looking down at the operation. She was able to report how they had a job to find a vein. They had to drain out all the blood. They found one eventually, a suitable one in the leg. And then she heard the drilling sound. She was able to report what the staff, the operating theatre, had said to each other, and so on. Of course, she moved on because she was clinically dead, and she saw the other side. And the conclusion of this BBC documentary was that this does pose a question for science, and it does undermine the presumption that the soul is linked to the brain, essentially. For it shows that actually the soul has the possibility of continued existence after the death of the brain.